So today, we are continuing in the series that we've been in, following Jesus, his practices. You see, if you've been around here for any amount of time, you know that we regularly reference back to our mission as a church is helping people follow Jesus. And we believe the best way to help people follow Jesus is equipping disciples, that is current followers of Jesus, to make other disciples. And so our definition of a disciple comes from Mark 1:17 and is pictured here in this visual graphic, this Venn diagram that we regularly show, and is follow made mission. A disciple is someone who's following Jesus, who's being made like Jesus, and who's joining Jesus on his mission. One of the reasons I love this picture is because it's right here where these three circles intersect, that this is where the fullness of a disciple's life is lived. And it's not because we're performing for Jesus in these things, but it's because it's right here where Jesus is found. And where Jesus is found, we can cultivate intimacy and connection with him. And so in this series, we've been zooming in specifically to the follow circles. We've been looking at these practices that Jesus engaged in and that brought him life and connection with his Father. And the goal here isn't just to add some religious things into our daily lives, but to look at these things that brought Jesus life and connection with his Father, knowing that if this brought life and connection to Jesus and his Father, that as we engage with these things, this open us up to the possibility of connection and intimacy with him also, that we can know him in ways through these practices, in deeper and deeper ways as we engage with them, and in the process, engage with him. In fact, really the heart of the series, Paul talks about here in Philippians 3. Listen to what he says here. He says, I want to know Christ. Like, that's the cry of his heart. I want to know Christ. Yes, to know the power of his resurrection and the participation in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, and so somehow to attain the resurrection from the dead. Not that I have already obtained this. Like Paul is saying, I haven't arrived at this, to know Christ in the way that I want to know him, or have already arrived at my goal, but I press on to take hold of that for which Christ took hold of me. He continues, brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it. Like, I'm not there yet. But one thing I do, forgetting what was behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. See, that cry of Paul's heart, with all that Paul had experienced, all that Paul had, quote unquote, done, there was this yearning to know Christ at a more deep, intimate way. And then he was striving, he was pressing on towards that. That's the invitation for us, not empty religious ritual, but ways in which we can know Jesus deeper and more intimately. That's what we're talking about in all of this. And so we've been going through this series where we've been looking at these different practices. We touched on serving, the way that Jesus served the first week. And then we went into Sabbath, or resting, the way that Jesus rested the second week. We talked about scripture, the way that Jesus engaged with it, what he thought of it, and what that looks like for us. And then last week, we talked about the practice of fasting. Not just how Jesus fasted, but really what was the heart behind fasting as we look at it through Jesus' life and through the scriptures as we move through it. And so the invitation each week, as you know if you've been here, is that at the end of every service says, okay, like what we believe is really Jesus' invitation in these things was not just to think on these things, but to actually practice the things that we're talking about, to put them into practice throughout our week. And so we at the end of every service, like, okay, what's your takeaway? What do you think God is inviting you into practicing this week? And then coming back the next week and going, okay, how did that go? Did we do that? And again, this isn't about religious guilt or shame or anything like that. It's just like, hey, becoming more and more of a place where it's not just about thinking and being inspired by these things on a Sunday morning, but actually saying, hey, God, how are these things going to affect the way that I live Monday through Saturday? Because I want to know you in new and deepening ways. I want my affections for you to grow. So, to begin at our tables this morning, I want to ask you a couple questions. If you were here last week, okay, what was your takeaway from last week when it came to fasting? Did you put it into practice, okay? Did you do it along the way? If you didn't, Let's just be honest as we go through it. How did you put it into practice? How did it go? What surprised you? What worked well? What didn't? What would you learn, okay, along the way? How do we move this beyond just something we do once into something that maybe becomes a regular part of the way that we engage with Jesus? Now, if you weren't here last week, that's okay. I want to begin with, for you, if that was the question Dave began with last week, he says, what is your experience with fasting been? Like maybe it was for religious purposes or health purposes, a combination of both. What is your experience? Maybe you tried it and you hated it. Maybe you, I don't have time for this story, but I'll tell you, my first time fasting, I was in middle school, and it talks about in that verse, like Dave read it last week, you put oil on your face so that you don't recognize it. I was just like, well, that's what it says, that's what I'll do. And my sister was like, what did you do? Like, what have you been doing? So I did the exact opposite. It brought attention to me rather than like, so there you go. That was my first experience with it years and years ago. So have you ever done it, maybe for health reasons? Have you tried it, hated it? Did you feel some kind of resistance to it? And if so, why? So did you practice it last week? Were you here? How did that go? And if you weren't, what has been your experience with fasting, whether it's been for health, religious reasons, okay? So I'm gonna give you about 5 minutes to go around at your tables and talk about this. Go for it, guys. Okay, I'm gonna interrupt you wherever you're at. So normally, give you guys a little peek behind the scenes. Like, as communicators here at Blue Ridge, when we're writing a talk, one of the questions we often start off with is, okay, what's the felt need? Like, what's the question that people are asking about this? What's the problem that we're trying to solve? What's that sore that we can rub? And oftentimes we begin our talks in those places, but just gonna let you know that today I'm skipping that portion of it. And here's the reason why. Because today we're gonna be talking about our wallets. We're gonna be talking about money. We're gonna be talking about, more specifically, generosity. And so, I assume I have your attention now, and that's all the tension that's needed in the room, right? Oftentimes, so we don't talk about money often around here. In fact, I looked last time was like 3 years ago, April of 2022. And but without fail, I have someone come up to me that will say, "Hey, Jeremy, I told I invited a friend. They came for the first time, a relative, things like that. And I told them, don't worry, my church never talks about money. And lo and behold, today that you talked about it. So I apologize if that's your story right now, and that's why you're here. We really don't talk about it that often, but why would we? See, so we got into this series on talking about like following Jesus and his practices. We very quickly realized that we couldn't talk about, like we couldn't do this series without talking about generosity, without talking about money and possessions and things like that. And why is that? Well, you don't have to get very far into Jesus' teachings to see that he taught on money, stewardship, generosity, more than he taught on a lot of other really, really big topics. In fact, here's a list of things that he talked about less than what he talked about money and stewardship. Heaven, hell, prayer, the end times, sexual sin, marriage, family, worship. I mean, all these things are really, really important, but he talked about money as much or more than these things up on this list. Now, I wouldn't go as far. I've heard some people say that Jesus talked about money or stewardship or generosity more than he talked about any other single subject. I don't know that I can go that far and to say that, but he certainly talked about it a lot. And so as we were looking at, okay, following Jesus, his practices, we knew that generosity had to be a part of what we talked about. So, now that everybody is thoroughly uncomfortable with what we're gonna be talking about, and there's a natural tension in the room in this case, let's go to our next table time and ask this question. What was the attitude towards generosity, giving, tithing, if you know what that word means, in your home growing up? And so I realize for some of us, you're growing up in that home right now, so you're gonna be sharing about the homes that you're in. Others of us, it's been decades, but what was the attitude towards generosity, giving, tithing in your home growing up? How much was it talked about? Was it ever talked about? What organizations did you know your family like practice generosity, giving towards, things like that? Was that even a category for anybody? And then number two, if you have enough time as you're moving through this, what do you believe are some of the biggest obstacles keeping followers from Jesus today engaging in more generosity, okay? So I'm gonna give you 5 minutes to go around at your tables and begin that discussion. Go for it, guys. So for me, my dad growing up, my answer to this first question My dad wasn't a follower of Jesus growing up, and so he wasn't really a part of he wasn't part at all of the church community that my sister, my mom, and I were a part of. And so really kind of giving, specifically when you talk about the church, generosity, tithing, that kind of stuff, it wasn't really a subject that we talked a lot about at home. One conversation that does stand out to me is I think, middle school age, and we were driving, my mom, my sister, and I were driving back from a church service, and my mom said, hey, I need you guys to pray for a conversation I need to have with your dad today. I need to talk to him about the fact that I've been tithing. And if you don't know what the word tithe means, it simply means the word tenth, or it's a practice of giving 10% of your finances to God. And so she's like, I've been tithing, and I haven't told your dad that I've been doing it. And so set a little bit of context there. Money was tight around my home growing up. My dad, he blue-collared worker, worked construction, specifically heavy equipment operator, moved dirt, ran backhoes, excavators, things like that. So we never had a lot of extra money growing up. And my mom, she handled the finances. So as God was moving in my mom's life a different way, she started taking money and setting aside to give to the church. And in that process, she knew that she hadn't been telling my dad she'd been doing that, and she knew that was wrong. So I also remember saying on that car ride home, saying, hey, if he asks me to stop, I'm going to stop. And so I don't know when they had the conversation. I just remember sometime after that, she came back. She let me know kind of how it all worked out. And basically my dad's attitude at the time was, which was really surprising, again, given where he was the guy, he was like, well, he said to her basically, well, I guess if we've been surviving with you giving, then you can continue to do that. So I know, that's probably not everyone's experience. In fact, a lot of your experience would be very different than that, I'm sure. I'm sure you just went around the tables and you shared, and there were a lot of different ideas on how generosity, giving, and even the idea of tithing was talked about, and the way it was handled in your homes growing up, and even the organizations and what that looked like, what charitable contributions look like in your home differed, I'm sure, from place to place. And so what did Jesus think about this? If this was something that he talked about surprisingly a lot, what were Jesus's thoughts? Now, here's the deal. The first 4 weeks we've been doing kind of like broad surveys of these subjects, and there's just too much content in one talk to talk about all of this. So I'm just gonna focus today on one passage, and then there's gonna be some multiple times for us to just quiet ourselves before God and go, God, how do you want me to respond? We're not even gonna be sharing a lot of what God is sharing with us, speaking to us at the tables. There's gonna be moments of quiet and go, okay, God, how do you want me to wrestle through what I just heard? And so if you got a Bible, you can open up to Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6, Bible's at the center, the page number is 1290 there. You can open up to the Bible app along the way. And this is gonna be a familiar passage to many of us that have read through parts of the New Testament. This is a fairly familiar one. This actually comes from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. It's our longest recorded sermon that Jesus gave that we have record of in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. And in a portion of that, he talks about this idea of money, of resources, of generosity, of possessions. He says this in verse 19. He says, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves don't break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And so we see that Jesus, as he's teaching for probably one of the first times on money, on possessions and things, he says he's taking it out of the realm of just numbers, of just something that goes in a spreadsheet. And he's pointed that this is a heart issue, that this whole idea is spiritual in nature. That how I view my money, my possessions, my things, how I view generosity reflects what I value. That it becomes a way of peering in to look at the priorities, the desires of my heart. And ultimately, desire is connected to this idea of worship. All this is connected together. So I think it's healthy for us to kind of wrestle through as followers of Jesus to kind of look at the culture around us and go, what is how the culture around us, how does it handle its resources of possession and finances? And how's that influencing me? Because the reality is, whether we like to admit it or not, every single one of us, to some degree or another, are being influenced by the culture around us. So what do the numbers tell us about how the culture around us, what they value, what they prioritize, what's important? Well, these are just a few quick things we see here. Some numbers that kind of reflect the culture around us. $700 to $750, that's in 2025, that's the average new car payment right now. $700 to $750. $1,597, that reflects the per person average debt repayment each month. $1,500, that's not household, that's per person, $1,597 per month. With my generation, Generation X, the forgotten generation, leading the pack at $2,100 a month, with millennials and Gen Z not far behind us. $1,948 right there. That represents, if you're planning on a week's vacation, this was done in April of 2024, on average, you can plan on about $1,948 per person. Now, I know that for some of you, that's way beyond what you spend in 1 year, and others of you, that's like, oh, wow, that's just that much kind of idea. Remember, these are averages kind of idea. Vacations, $1,948. Now, this one I got pushback on the father-daughter dance. $15,000. That represents the average cost to raise a medium-sized dog during its lifetime. $15,000, but if you average that out to about 13 years, it's less than about $100 a month. And you start thinking of, like, it breaks its leg, emergency health visits, eats something it shouldn't eat, dog food, the cost of the dog originally, it's not hard to get to this cost pretty quick. Now, here's the deal, okay? These are just a couple, okay? These are by far, obviously not an exhaustive list. And what I want you to hear me say is this, okay? I want to say this several times. It is not wrong, nor does Jesus ever teach against owning nice things, taking nice vacations, or owning a dog, okay? Nowhere in the Gospels does Jesus teach against, that it is wrong to own nice things, take nice vacations, or having a pet, okay? I wanna be that clear. But what becomes concerning about this is culturally then when we look at this next number. This represents for middle income households, okay? This is middle income households, which would make up the vast majority of us in this room. Middle income earners, this is the average amount that is given to any charitable organization per year, on average, with about a quarter of that representing gifts to religious organizations, so less than $1,000 a year. So, what do we do with this? Because this is talking about the culture out there. What does this mean for us? Well, this is the first place where I want us just to stop. And this isn't about me judging you or you judging me. This is about us going, Jesus, would you judge? This is a reflection of my heart, what I value, what I prioritize. What does my bank account say about that? Here's the question I want to ask. Ask Jesus on your own. You're not going to share this answer with anyone. This is between you and Jesus. What does my spending reveal about the things that I desire? In other words, if someone who didn't know me opened up my bank account, my credit card statement, or looked at my birthday money, or the gift certificates I spend my money on, or the allowance I get, and they were to look at a spreadsheet of all that, what would they deduce without knowing me? These are the things that I value. These are my priorities. These are the desires of my heart. So just close your eyes for a minute and you ask Jesus about you. Take a minute or two. He continues in this same section, the next verse. He gets a little abstract here. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is healthy, the whole body is full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. So if the light within you is darkness, how deep is that darkness? What is Jesus talking about here? Well, in Jewish literature during Jesus' time, the eye, a good eye, was a reference to kind of an open-handed generosity to the world around them. A bad eye was a closed hand, a stingy, a self-serving kind of attitude towards the world around us. So obviously, Jesus is using this eye as a metaphor for how we view our money, how we view our resources, how we view our possessions, how we view generosity. You see, just like the physical eye, if my eye is unhealthy, it distorts, it clouds my view. I can't see things clearly. I can't perceive the world around me the way it was meant to be perceived if my eye's not working correctly. In the same way, what he's saying is like, if our view of money, possession, things is unhealthy, then guess what? It's distorting the way I view God, the way I view others, the way I view life itself. I had a boss years ago, I had a boss, and he viewed every financial transaction as how could he get the most from this financial transaction for himself, even if that meant at the expense of the other person and or bending some moral boundaries. And so you know what his perspective was on most of the people around him? That they were doing the same. He struggled to trust people because he assumed that the people surrounding him, that everybody was just in it for themselves, what they could get from him. So he was constantly on guard and struggled to trust even the good people, even his own family around him. Why? His views of life had been distorted. This is what Jesus was talking about. He says, when my eye is bad and I'm looking at finances through this lens of what I can get and how much I can take and how much I can possess, guess what? It creates this darkness in the human soul and spirit. It creates a moral blindness that doesn't allow me to clearly see the things of God, God himself, the people around me. I have this distorted view on the other side. He's saying a good eye, one that's marked by the generosity, that is informed by the generosity of God directed towards us, that allows us to see the things that we've been given, the resources that we have as a tool to be used for Jesus and with others in the practice of generosity. When that happens, all of a sudden we begin to see the things of God more clearly. We just took communion. We think about the gospel, the good news, the ultimate act of generosity, where the God of everything came and allowed himself to be hung on the cross, taking the penalty and the price of our sin upon him, doing for us what we couldn't do for what we couldn't do for ourselves, and paying that whole debt. When we look at that and we see that when our generosity is informed by the ultimate act of generosity on the cross, the good news of the gospel, all of a sudden it's not about God trying to take something away from me, God trying to get something from me, but it's about responding to a God who's given me abundantly more than I could ever imagine or deserve. So another moment for us to reflect. Ask Jesus, what lens shapes the way I view money and possessions? Do I see it through fear, greed, selfishness, or scarcity? Or do I see it as a tool to be leveraged for Jesus and others with an open hand through a heart of generosity? Just ask him, based on not just what you feel or think, but based on the reality of how you live your life. Do I view it as a good eye or as a bad eye? Take a moment and just ask him. Close your eyes and take a few moments. Jesus finishes this section with this statement. No one can serve two masters, since either he will hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. This isn't Jeremy saying this. This is Jesus saying, like, those things are incongruent. Our affections will be directed somewhere. Our desires will be directed somewhere. Our love is going to be directed at something or someone. And it's impossible to serve both. He says we're gonna have to choose. That the way we view our money, the way we respond with our possessions, the way that we view the resources that God has entrusted with us, and how we live that out will be the practical way in which we're making the choice. God, is it the money, the things, and that I love? Or is it you? You cannot serve both God and money. So let me ask you this. What would be different about the way that I live if I trusted God more? And the key word here is more. All of us. Paul was talking about it. He hadn't arrived. I haven't arrived. We haven't arrived. I would say that the majority of us in this room would say we trust God, and I believe many of us do at different levels, degrees in our life. But what would it look like? What would be different about the way that I lived if I trusted God more and money, resources, things, possessions less? Take a moment, close your eyes, and just ask God, God, what would be different about the way I live Monday through Saturday if I trusted you more and my bank account less? So what do we do with this? What do we do with this? Well, here's how we want to finish up. I'm going to give you another time in a moment here to do what we've been doing throughout this whole series. What is one step I can take toward generosity this week? Only I'm gonna let you know, you're not gonna share this with anybody at your table necessarily, okay? So we're not gonna go around. I understand the nuances of group dynamics, and when we're talking about finances, I get that, okay? So I'm gonna ask you to ask Jesus one more time, based on everything we've talked about today, what's one step you can take towards generosity this week? And then I'm gonna ask you to ask God, who in my life, because we've gotta be sharing this stuff with someone, who in my life can I invite to walk with me in this step? Who can I share with this? And that in a few moments is what you're gonna share. You're gonna share the person you're gonna share this with this week, that's going to walk with you. You're going to invite them into this. But I wanna begin. So what do I mean? What's one step we can take for generosity? For some of us, because I believe some of the biggest obstacles to us being more generous often is the debt that we carry, right? I think for some of us, the most practical step we could take to move towards generosity is go home and cut up those credit cards, literally, and go, I'm done living by credit. I'm done paying for things in this way. I'm gonna cut these things up. I think for others of us, is we have things like MoneyWorks around here that we don't know where the money's going. We don't know where the resources are going and all that kind of stuff. And that's because we're, just like if you're trying to lose weight and those types of things, you need to have some sort of diet plan. The same thing is, if we're gonna become more of a generous people, I'm telling you, we have to know where it's going and how it's working. It's not gonna happen unless we move towards it purposefully. And so there are people through like MoneyWorks who would be willing to sit down and help coach you. What does it look like to create a budget? How can you get out of debt so you can be freed up to live more generously? Some of us, we've never given. And so it's something as simple as going online, going, okay, God, I'm gonna trust, and I'm gonna give. And guys, If you really don't believe that Blue Ridge is a church you can trust your finances with, I would encourage you, find a church that you can trust. I really mean that. I really do believe that. If it's not Blue Ridge, find some place you can trust and say, God, here's a portion of what you've entrusted me with. Some of us, we've been giving, but there's a simple kind of starter place when you're a movement you can talk about, the 10-10-80 rule. A place might be to say, hey, God, I'm gonna start saving 10, giving 10, and living off the 80% of the rest. Saving 10, giving 10, and starting to move towards that this week. Some of us are business owners. How do we take the businesses and the finance of the businesses and start stewarding them in a way that we're known in the community as a place with our employees and the people around us that is generous because of the generosity of God directed towards us? Others of us, it's our tools in our garages. You like how neat and clean and shiny and nice they are, and you know as soon as you loan them out, they're not coming back to you, and that terrifies you. God is going, I want you to loosen that grip. For me, guys, I know there's a lot of skepticism when pastors talk about this stuff. I want to tell you that everything we've talked about today, I genuinely put into practice. If you want to talk to me about the details specifically of what that looks like in our day-to-day life, mine and my family's, I would love to have a conversation with you. And I don't mind getting into the nitty-gritty to saying this is exactly what it looks like. But for me, one of the practical things for me is people I respect that I see living generous lives, they carry cash with them, and I don't ever carry cash with me, so that they can respond in the moment to the needs around them. For me, that's what I believe. One of the things with noticing the margins, with caring for people I normally don't like noticing, is that's a response of like, God, I need to have cash with me. Just to be able to just say, here you go. This is a way in which I can practically respond. What about you? What is one step I can take towards generosity this week? Right now, take a moment, ask God. And then I'm gonna ask you to, I'll tell you when I'm gonna ask you to share just the name you're gonna share it with at your table, okay? Go for it, guys. Take a moment. And now just go around quickly at your tables and just use their first name and say, this is who I'm sharing my next step with, okay? Share, and then I'm gonna have a stand and pray. Go for it. Should take you like a minute to get around. Go for it, guys. Okay. If you're not around your table, you didn't obey my instructions. Would you guys all stand up with me? And I want to read this over you before we go. This is what Paul's prayer was for the church at Ephesus. I pray that he may grant you, according to the riches of his glory, to be strengthened with power in your inner spirit, or beginning through his Spirit, and that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. I pray you be rooted and firmly established in love, that you may be able to comprehend with all the saints what is the length, the width, the height, and the depth of God's love, and to know Christ's love that surpasses knowledge, so that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. Jesus, we thank you for your generosity directed towards us. And now we pray that as we go, we would be generous towards others, that people would see the way that we're generous with one another and whether they're generous with others, and they would mark it as different than the culture around us. And they would say, how come you live life like this? And Jesus, we would ultimately bring it back to who you are. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Love you guys. Have a great week.